Yeah, I'd like to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about a key part of your book, and it kind of gives it an insider feel, is the chapters where you talk about Jimmy Lai, whom we all, many of us, know of, if not know, and he's the founder of Next Digital and Apple Daily, who, as you say in the book, was among Hong Kong's first political prisoners in the Chinese Communist era. Lai, who is serving his sentence in jail for taking part in 2 peaceful demonstrations in 2019 and has been charged with some other things as well, as someone you knew well and for years. So first tell us about him, and Jimmy Lai's been a controversial figure in Hong Kong and had long been a thorn in the side of the CCP. And how did he, a devout Catholic and a businessman who made 3 separate fortunes, become such a threat to China?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and I've thought about that a lot. I mean, here's a guy who, I mean, he epitomizes the Hong Kong success story. He came to Hong Kong at the age of 12 as an illegal immigrant hidden in the bottom of a fishing boat in a sampan. Lived and worked in a textile factory. I mean, he was a child laborer. Let's be frank about it. Taught himself English by reading a dictionary. First bought into was a textile mill owner. Then he founded the Giordano retail chain, kind of fast fashion before its time. And after Tiananmen, it was not a political guy. He was like in the rag trade, right? He was just a Hong Kong entrepreneur who enjoyed life and was radicalized by the June 4th, 1989 killings. And well, he took part, or he supported the democracy movement when the students were there in the spring of '89. And after that, founded first Next magazine and then Apple Daily. I guess the fact that the Chinese can't silence him, and he has resources and he has contacts and he knows a lot of people around the world, and he's been very open to media people, seems to drive the Chinese insane. I mean, it's hard for them because if they allow one person to be free, well, then the next person wants to be free. And so I think they need to make an example, and they need to, when they are trying to break him. So he's been in jail pretty much nonstop since the beginning of December a year ago. He was let out for a couple of days and basically under house arrest over the Christmas week in 2020. He's in a maximum security prison. He's a 74-year-old diabetic, as you say, a very devout Roman Catholic, who's always preached nonviolence. And yet every time he's in court, they put him in manacles and he's in 30, 35 pounds, whatever it is, of heavy chains, just to humiliate him and to show the world what they can do to someone, that they can basically treat him like a caged animal. And for what? For asking really just for freedom, for doing what he'd been doing for 26 years, running the newspaper. And I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, he, for many years said, they're going to come after me. I'm going to be, target number 1. They're going to put me in jail. And, you always think, really, is it really that bad? I mean, Hong Kong seems like it's okay, but, I was wrong.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you about press freedom, something near and dear to the hearts of many of us on this call. Given that, I'd like to sort of talk about did Apple Daily go too far here? There's some that say the protesters in 2019 did, in their calls for democracy and their anti-Chinese rhetoric, kind of bought a ticket to this, that China was never going to let this happen. And that some say that Jimmy Lai bought a ticket to it as well, with his calls for democracy in his newspaper, something that they could actually come and shut down. And we saw them shut it down very sadly. And I mean, I was there in 2020, right after national security law took effect, when they, perp walked him through his own newsroom, rifled through. I mean, it was an incredible scene, 200 police through that newsroom. And when we at the FCC put out a statement decrying this, the foreign ministry told us to mind our own business. So that sort of, I think, marked sort of the beginning of what many of us saw as a new chapter in press freedom in Hong Kong. But I'd like you to engage a little bit with that question of Apple Daily, which was, they were not a polite newspaper. Let's put it that way.
So let me rhetorically and half seriously ask you, throw the question back to you. Did the FCC go too far in putting out that statement? Because the foreign ministry just slapped you guys down, and they keep coming after you. Maybe you lose your leash. Should you guys, and I don't know if you debated this internally, when I was on the board there, we used to have these debates, should the FCC be engaged in these sorts of issues? For one, I'll answer the question because it's rhetorical. I think the FCC was perfectly proper to do that. And I think, I think your question is one that a lot of people ask, but I think it's easy to answer. I don't think you should blame the victim. Hong Kong people wanted what was promised to them by the Chinese. The Chinese, in the treaty with the Brits, in the basic law, and in hundreds of statements from the most senior leaders down to local level people, all promised Hong Kong democracy, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong, and a high degree of autonomy. I'm not really sure how exercising that, particularly when those promises weren't being fulfilled, is the fault of the victim, who, and by the way, these victims are in jail. We have 7 people, counting Jimmy Lai, from Apple Daily, Next Digital, in jail right now. They've been there, well, Jimmy's been there over a year, as I said. Most of them have been there since last July. They haven't been tried, let alone convicted. They're not granted bail. I mean, is it their fault that they ran a newspaper just as they'd been running it for 26 years, and then overnight the Chinese decide to throw them in the slammer for that? And again, no bail.
I agree with you, but
I know, I'm sure you do.
There are some, but that becomes the issue, and it gets reported this way, certainly in the Chinese press, that that this was a person who had it coming. And when we put out our statement at the FCC, it was, you don't understand, you are meddling in with somebody. This is not about press freedom. This is about other things. And, how dare you get in the middle of this? That was what essentially the foreign minister said to us.
Yeah. And, I think I got attacked for something recently by one of the former chief executives who seems to have a thing for the FCC too. And, it's sort of like, you guys don't like him because he's a troublemaker, because he won't sit down and shut up and kowtow to you. I mean, that's really what they don't like. And sure, I mean, it was a very aggressive newspaper, and I certainly would not defend everything that they did over those 26 years. I don't think anybody did. It would, including Jimmy Lai, by the way. They definitely made some mistakes, and they did some, things that, I think Bloomberg, for example, would not do. But that doesn't mean that they should just be sitting in jail, and that we should have had a company that was, by the way, a publicly listed company with a market value of about $100 million. It was destroyed overnight by the government. Assets have been seized. Its place is being dismembered. Close to 1,000 people lost their jobs, including 600 journalists. And, we go on. Is that their fault? Is that the fault of the victim? I don't think so. I think it's because China can't take countervailing centers of power. It cannot take dissent. It can't take discussion. It has to have, it's like a god, right? It's like a religion. It has to have the one and the only way, the only truth. And Jimmy Lai just militantly refused to accept that.
Bill Holstein asked a good related question. How long can the Western media presence in Hong Kong last? Well, you address this somewhat in your book.
Yeah, I mean, you have Western media in Beijing and in Shanghai, obviously limited. About the only place you don't have it is Pyongyang, I guess. I don't think Hong Kong is going the way of the DPRK, but I suppose it's possible. I mean, you don't have Western media really in Xinjiang and in Tibet. So I guess that could be a precedent, but I think Hong Kong is going to remain as a major city. And as long as they keep giving visas, there's at least going to be some limited presence. I have to say, I mean, Bill, it's, when, I've known Bill a long time. And when we first knew each other, it was, and I had lived in Korea. I went there in the 80s when it was still, essentially under military rule. The idea that the New York Times would have editorial people in Seoul because they couldn't be in Hong Kong for one reason or another, initially for visa reasons, is just mind-boggling to me, that in the space of 30 years, a place like South Korea that's under military control becomes, a very open society. And a place like Hong Kong that seems so open is a place where they throw children's storybook illustrators into jail without bail.